Right.
You're listening to The Voice, 17104.com.
Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No segregation, no segregation, no segregation, Lord, for me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Still away to Jesus. Still away home. 'Cause I ain't got long to stay here. In 1662, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, declared all slaves within the Confederacy or in the South should be henceforth and forever free. Later in 1665, Abraham Lincoln declared the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed slaves and did away with slavery in the whole country, the continental United States. Some people don't realize that it happened twice. The first time was prior, or in the beginning of this, in the middle of the Civil War, not prior, but in the beginning of the Civil War. The second time was at the end of the Civil War. The Emancipation Proclamation. And Juneteenth happened in June was the time when this took place, and that was a celebration that was held all over the South, in particular at first, and then the North caught up, and now the entire country, parts of the country, celebrated the Emancipation Proclamation and the ending of slavery in this country. Uh, our people of African descent, helped to build this country uh, and help also to restore it to its rightful place in terms of a United States of America. Brothers and sisters, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Richard James, and this is the Richard James Show. I was blessed at the age of 14 to have a mother who believed very heavily in our uh, uh, knowing our history. My father did also, but my mother would also purchase us books. And so I started studying Black history many, many years ago. And the emancipation of our people is very, very critical and very, very important. It's something that we fought for, we longed for. Now, I have also uh, uh, set up to provide you with a video on the Emancipation Proclamation, basically that took place in Houston, Galveston, and Texas. Now, a lot of our folks know about Georgia, know about North and South Carolina, know about Florida, but they don't know a whole lot about what happened in Texas. And they just assume what happened in Georgia happened in Texas. Well, that's not really the case. Let me make it very clear. Yes, our people trying to escape slavery uh, in many, many ways. One was the Underground Railroad, and they would escape in a trail that led through Ohio and up into Canada, because at the time Canada uh, did not have slavery, no slavery there, so they were able to go across the border of Canada and be free. And they didn't have a fugitive slave law in Canada, because even in the United States, the slave hunters and seekers would go up into Pennsylvania and other parts of the country and recapture slaves or ex-slaves and bring them back, and sometimes capture freemen who never were slaves and bring them back into the South. This happened, but a lot of the folks are not acquainted with the fact. Now remember that there was Texas was originally a part of Mexico, a part of Mexico. That's the reality. And one of the major issues why Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett and some of the other American heroes fought was to maintain slavery in Texas. Now in Mexico, slavery had been ended years ago. So many of our people would escape from Texas and flee into the country of Mexico because of the freedom that they would require. So when we think about the Mexicans as being the enemy, take a second look at it. And many of the so-called states in the Southwest, including California, were a part of Mexican territory, and it was taken by the imperialists in the United States. Taken. And of course, the cowboys in Texas felt that Texas was theirs, and they wanted to be a part of the United States, and they wanted to maintain their agricultural economy, cotton, what have you. And the folks that worked the fields, tilled the soil, were Africans who had been slaves and brought into forced labor to do so. Well, the forced labor was not a great idea. And when a man is enslaved, he wants to be free. So many of our people fled the state of Mexico, the state of Texas, into the Mexican territory, and others went north. They did what they could uh, to emancipate themselves and free themselves. And it all didn't all happen at the same time. A lot of things happened along the way. Uh, there was a movement movement in a part of some northern states uh, to try to get um, African Americans involved in the whole uh, uh, war. There was a gentleman who was the leading African American of his day named Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass approached Abraham Lincoln for the right for people of African descent to participate in the Civil War and to fight in the Civil War. And there was resistance at first, and some of the racist crackers uh, uh, did not, and they call themselves that crackers. Sometimes they call them Peckerwood. Those are some of the names that they applied to themselves. Uh, did not want to fight alongside people of color, but eventually Lincoln agreed to it, and we set up divisions like the 54th Massachusetts, for example. Also, the 27th Infantry was set up, cavalry in Texas, and there's a lot of history there that you need to know of what happened to our people in various parts of the world. We had two philosophies that was going on. We had a philosophy of nonviolence, and we had a philosophy of individuals that felt that we had to pick up arms in order to free ourselves, in order to protect ourselves. And so this video is basically concentrating in the state of Texas to give you some of the historical accounts of what happened to African Americans in that particular region of the country. So, without further ado, we're going to present to you uh, this Juneteenth celebration of the emancipation of African American history. We're going to present to you a video, and then we will come back and complete our dialogue.
Lingering was, what did freedom look like?
The slaves built this country.
They had a sense of who they were. They very quickly built a sense of community.
To what degree have we actually achieved the absolute freedom that Juneteenth promised?
Ignoring these painful histories doesn't mean that they don't still influence us.
We stand on the shoulders of those that came before us, and we need to honor their memory by telling their story.
Juneteenth, 1865 to 2021.
Galveston, Texas, a place known for tourism and quick getaways. But it's the history which happened here that impacts us all today.
African slaves were brought here on ships in the 1800s. But even after the slave trade ended, slavery here did not.
It was 1865, June 19th, now known as Juneteenth, when Union soldiers arrived and told slaves they were free.
It came 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln announced slavery had ended in the United States.
And we should remember this important date, June 19, 1865, represents the evolution of our country to a more perfect union. We were not perfect in 1528, 1619, 1776, 1865, or even the day in 2021, but we're moving, hopefully, to a more perfect union.
Juneteenth is directly related to the history of the Civil War and the emancipation of enslaved people in the Confederacy. Juneteenth is important for Texas because that is when enslaved Texans learned they were free and that the Confederacy had fallen.
So we're standing in the 2200 block of the Strand Historic District in Galveston. This was the heart of the commercial district, and at one time
Was the largest city in Texas.
the largest enslaver also lived here in Galveston. They owned 7 plantations, 4 in Brazoria County, 2 in Matagorda County, and 1 in Fort Bend.
Texas was this safe haven for slavery. They did what they call the running of the slaves. That was basically moving their slaves to Texas because there was no Union presence in Texas.
When Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, he knew that that would not immediately end slavery, and it didn't. And the reason is fairly simple. The Confederate States of America had formed its own country. They elected their own president. Confederate states printed their own money, which is why the Confederacy and the United States went to war. The United States' goal at the beginning of the war was just to restore the Union. The first war goal was not to emancipate the enslaved population.
And there were all these myths and stories about what happened and why it took 2.5 years for the word to reach Texas. Plantation owners in Texas were well aware of the Emancipation Proclamation, but they ignored it. What they cared about was maintaining the agrarian economy in Texas, and that was solidly based on cotton. And to maintain that, they needed slave labor. General Gordon Granger was on his way to Texas. Most of the Texas authorities had a pretty good idea what he was coming to Texas to do. Granger was in Texas for about a month. He sent his troops.
There were white soldiers and black soldiers.
Plantation the plantation making the announcement.
Those black soldiers are people who especially helped shift the Union war goals from a war to restore the Union into a war of emancipation. It was personal for them.
They went over to the old Custom House on 20th Street, to the Courthouse Square, from the Courthouse Square to the Colored Church on Broadway, which was Reedy Chapel.
Some of the dock workers were among the first to get the word, and so the celebrations began.
Give us a sense of what it must have been like for slaves on Juneteenth when they heard that message.
You know, that was something that was almost like going to heaven.
The celebrations, just to be so excited to taste that freedom.
The initial celebrations, there would be prayer services looking back at our journey in this country and what we had to endure in bondage. And the people who never lived to see that day. I think it's inescapable not to remember those people. Transatlantic voyage, the Middle Passage, people jumping off ships to avoid the treatment that they would have to endure.
You know, and old Marshall didn't tell you, it was free.
He didn't tell you that?
No, he didn't tell you. I think now they said they wait them 6 months out of that, 6 months, and turn them loose on the 19th of June. That's why, you celebrate that day, colored folks. Celebrate that day.
One of the quotes that I'm most fond of is from a former slave named Felix Haywood. Slavery could make you free, but it couldn't make you rich, because a lot of slaves thought that now that they were free, they would be rich, just like the white man.
You think about the elation, the trepidation of enslaved people not knowing what their future holds and being enslaved and bondage being lifted from their backs.
And there was one narrative about one slave who got the word, and his sister said, brother gave a whoop and ran away, and I never saw him again.
Was the South ready to free slaves? No, we know that.
Even though the order indicated the enslaved were free, if you look at the last sentence, it gives some instructions of what they can or cannot do.
The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere.
When you're told you're free, you're thinking that, oh, I can live my life. But it wasn't like that.
On one hand, you were free by name, but the actual reality of freedom, you were not fully experiencing it.
There were a lot of very frightened former slaves, and a lot of them stayed on the plantation.
They laid the bricks in the downtown area here where we stand on many of these buildings. Not only laid the bricks, but made the bricks.
Just off Galveston's bustling Broadway Street is Ashton Villa, built in 1859 by James Monroe Brown, a loyalist to the Confederacy, dubbed an honorary colonel. Brown was also a wealthy banker, architect, and mason who designed what's believed to be Texas' first all-brick house, a palace with bricks, all laid by slaves.
Anywhere you read, they will tell you that, slaves did all the work for this. They had to follow what the contractor was either telling them or showing them in order to do it. And look at this place. It's beautiful.
All of the intricacies and the detail that still stand today. It's amazing.
1859, one of the few buildings that withstood the 1900 storm.
Ashton Villa was saved from demolition in 1970. The historic home, now an event space, is operated by the Galveston Historical Foundation and home to the island's annual Juneteenth celebration.
They could leave the farm, they could leave the plantation, and they did, because so many emancipated people no longer wanted to work in agriculture because it reminded them of enslavement. For many people, the draw was labor, the opportunity to earn wages.
Working to pay off debt. The debts were never paid off. There were a lot of things that still kept the free people
suppressed.
And that's why a group of them ended up in your hometown, in Houston. So they marched to Houston.
The black population of Houston boomed. They began to build homes in the part of Houston known as 4th Ward. Houston was divided into 6 different wards at the time. And so the land in that area of 4th Ward happened to be very low and flood prone. It wasn't land that was coveted by white Houstonians at the time.
When you look at the bricks of Freedmanstown, that brick is a symbol of foundation. That brick was a symbol of hope. The brick was theirs. They made the brick, they formed the brick, shaped the brick, they laid the brick. They stood on the brick.
Iconic housing of Freedmanstown was the shotgun house. There was a door in the front and then a door in the back. And people would joke that if you shot a gun, the bullet would travel all the way through without hitting anything.
The legendary Jack Yates, this is the land where he lived, and right next door to him was his son, the printer Rutherford B.H. Yates. The first time I walked along these bricks, I was very emotional. This is where my people decided that they would survive. These are 8-pound bricks that were double baked. And the significance of these bricks is that it has that beautiful red color of the clay that was here. And the fact that they are still here today is a testament to their strength, a testament to their craftsmanship and their skill.
No, these are original. I reside here in Freedmanstown. I was born in Freedmanstown, probably conceived in Freedmanstown. And this is a home that has been passed down through our family. I'm like the 5th generation. And the family operated a ice business and just drove through the community selling blocks of ice.
They did their best to gain property and to support their communities.
The wards in Houston functioned a little bit like small towns. 3rd Ward develops a black community. 5th Ward develops one early. The black community of 3rd Ward begins to develop around what we today call Emancipation Avenue, but that back then was Dowling Street, which was actually the name of a Confederate. Dowling is really the center of old black 3rd Ward. And one of the reasons for that is the creation or the purchase of Emancipation Park. And it's the first public space owned by black people in the state of Texas.
With newfound freedom came new challenges, including the fight to be seen as equal.
Freed men and women did more than survive. They built a legacy.
And it is right here, Emancipation Park,
in Houston's historic 3rd Ward.
Emancipation Park was always a place to celebrate.
2 black church congregations fundraised to buy the park. For them, the memory of Juneteenth would have been very fresh. They were someone else's property less than a decade earlier.
I'm the great-great-granddaughter of Jack Yates. He was instrumental in purchasing Emancipation Park, where the free slaves celebrated Juneteenth.
One of the most famous families in Reconstruction era Houston were the Yates family.
He was free. However, his wife and children weren't. So he came to Texas and entered back into slavery so that he could be with his family.
They were brought here to continue to be slaves.
Once freedom came again, he knew what that tasted like. He knew what that felt like. So he took his family and moved to Houston to start a brand new life.
Jack Yates actually began helping and teaching and helping them to learn, because at that time, you know, slaves weren't supposed to read or write.
He was a wage laborer as his day job, and at night preached near the Buffalo Bayou in Houston. And then gradually they were able to build their own church.
I'm a member of Antioch Missionary Baptist Church and have been all of my life. That was the first church that he started, but there were many other churches that he started, including Bethel in Houston.
It is that spirit, it is that zeal, it is that determination that he and others poured into the foundations when they built this church. So when you talk about World War I, our soldiers went off to fight. When they came home, Antioch was able to train and cross-train ex-veterans in masonry work, in carpentry work, and really help these ex-soldiers to find jobs and to provide homes for their families, education for their children. It was these very women from this very church who taught other women how to vote.
So many great people have been here and have been inspiring and galvanizing the community.
When I was growing up in Houston, I knew the name Yates because it was the name of a high school, Jack Yates High School in 3rd Ward, the first black school in Houston. For a while had just been called Houston Colored High School. As the black community spreads and grows in other parts of the city, you need more schools. So when a second high school is established in Houston in 3rd Ward, it's named after Jack Yates.
A massive mural in Galveston's tourist-heavy Strand district depicts the long journey to absolute equality.
Expand the narrative of Juneteenth to tell a more full story of our shared American history. The things that have been invisible are becoming visible, and the stories that have been hidden are being discovered.
Galveston Historical Foundation member and Hitchcock-born businessman Sam Collins made it his business to have Galveston's history on display. I met with him at the mural, an art installation that Sam wanted to use to paint a better picture of Juneteenth, giving it depth, dating it back to centuries before the emancipation of slaves. Artist and activist Reginald Adams brought the vision to life with detailed vignettes featuring historic figures.
And then he moves through the Middle Passage, the enslaved Africans being sold by other Africans. Harriet Tubman is an iconic female image on the mural. Then you have Abraham Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation.
The soldiers have a very prominent place within this mural. There are more soldiers than anyone else here on the mural, it seems like.
The United States colored troops represent 75% of the Union forces that came into Texas. Nowhere in the history books when I was in elementary, junior high, high school, or even college, did anybody teach me that colored troops helped bring the message of freedom here.
Just beyond the mural and at the end of the same lot, side of the old Osterman building and where General Granger signed the orders and dispersed the troops to post them, is the Juneteenth historical marker from the Texas Historical Commission.
And I thought, how can that be? one of the most historic events in American history, didn't have a subject marker.
Sam Collins spent 2 years fundraising and organizing efforts to secure one.
One of the things that I've worked to do is not to take away from what has already been told, but to add to it. This corner has now been transformed into an outdoor classroom. We're going to use technology to teach this history through augmented reality. Point their smartphone at the mural using the Uncover Everything app, and videos will pop up to expand the story so that they can learn more.
My girl Harriet and showing all the things that Black people have been going through and to be able to get the shackles off.
It all came together to create this beautiful mosaic of historian, artists, technology, visitors, tourists, people. All of that creates a beautiful picture of the expansion of knowledge, information, the history, and a lot of times they don't talk about that in the history class. So we got to get them in the picture, not just him by himself. There we go.
Yes, sir.
His spirit and actions are one and the same, starting with the marker and now this mural.
Hopefully, individuals will wake up a desire for self-discovery and discovery of history that maybe was not taught in the classroom, so now they come to the outdoor classroom.
Some of the early Juneteenth celebrations were marked by pageantry, flowers, and people riding in these very elaborate coach setups.
Regional and local Black newspapers celebrating the day. You'll see announcements about picnics that are related to the holiday.
A lot of people for those celebrations dressed up in their Sunday best. They would just be joyful. There would be parties, church services, in a lot of the communities, whites didn't want to recognize those celebrations. If some of those former slaves had jobs, they couldn't get the day off to celebrate. A lot of the city officials said, well, you can't have your celebration in the city. And so that would push those celebrations out away from the city in rural settings, in pastures, meadows, groves, wherever. They went with the flow.
I guess my earliest memories of celebrating Juneteenth would be when I was a child. Juneteenth was always a big celebration in our community.
Eventually, you'll see the establishment of parades. We know in Houston we do have a couple of parades. In fact, Juneteenth, Queen and King.
Family get-togethers, community get-togethers. You would have barbecue, watermelon,
ribs and hot sausage,
red soda pop. Those were the staples. You had to have all of that on Juneteenth. You must have that barbecue.
In recent years, Juneteenth celebrations continue to include parades and music, but most importantly, a focus on the food. And one restaurant that continues to provide Juneteenth meals, even amidst the pandemic, is Lucille's.
Feeding all the people they can, this fine dining Houston establishment, home to a culinary artist carrying on the family's legacy of African-American excellence in gastronomy. Beautiful. This Museum District restaurant is Lucille's. It is where the past meets the present on a plate. Restaurant itself is named after owner and executive chef Chris Williams' great-grandmother, Lucille B. Smith.
Often noted as Texas's first African-American businesswoman. She created the first instant hot roll mix in the history of this country, which is a recipe that Pillsbury borrowed to create their empire. This is verified by the Chicago Tribune in 2014. She was the first national African-American food editor for Sepia magazine, which is now Ebony magazine. Her client list included everybody from LBJ to the Roosevelts, Martin Luther King, to Muhammad Ali, to Joe Louis, and all points in between.
Chef Williams continues the family legacy, having hosted President Biden. But it is not just the powerful for whom he hosts or prepares food for.
So we provide service to all the historically Black neighborhoods, from Sunnyside to 3rd Ward to 5th Ward to Acres Home.
having founded the nonprofit Lucille's 1913, the year his great-grandmother birthed her catering business, and also the same year marking the 50th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation.
At our peak, we were doing 1,800 meals a day.
So I had a pork shoulder that I braised for about 4 hours.
It allows them to play with a ton of different ingredients.
This Juneteenth, he'll prepare more meals.
The barbecue chicken, the beans.
On top of the already 250,000 meals served.
And that's what we're working on right now for the menu for today. Getting ready to feed the people of Houston.
Delivering dignity and preserving history.
The restaurant does pay homage to her culinary freedom and creativity as a chef.
With fresh, elevated food.
It's exactly what we do over today at Lucille's. It's Southern cuisine with global influences.
The word Reconstruction sounds good, and it started out well-intentioned, but it didn't stay, quote-unquote, Reconstruction, did it?
No. When we think about the period of Reconstruction, particularly here in Texas, we always have to think about the turmoil around politics.
The Democratic Party was conservative. The Republican Party was liberal. 1870 15th Amendment is what makes black men's right to vote constitutional. And this changes the political landscape of parts of the South that had large black populations. Black men start voting other black men into office. Some places had black sheriffs. So this immediately changes the politics of the South. So the Ku Klux Klan arises as the violent wing of the Democratic Party.
We were familiar with the KKK, but there were a number of white vigilante groups that existed during this time that terrorized African Americans.
By the early 1900s, the black community had already established itself with neighborhoods, businesses, and schools, but blacks still weren't considered as equal. With segregation and Jim Crow laws, they were still being treated like second-class citizens.
Segregation laws restricted every public space where Southerners could possibly make contact. When we say Jim Crow law, we are referring to legal segregation. Boston creates segregation laws in order to separate black and white passengers on city streetcars in the 1840s. People in Boston started to refer to the black section of streetcars as the Jim Crow section. They did that because Jim Crow referred to a popular minstrel figure. Early on, it was white performers, typically white men, who would blacken their faces using burnt cork, but Jim Crow was the most popular blackface minstrel character. So popular that many white people in the United States began to identify the name Jim Crow with black people.
Here in Houston, you really can't think about Jim Crow laws without thinking about the 24th Infantry, African American soldiers who found themselves here at Camp Logan and found themselves the victims of police brutality and Jim Crow laws and segregation.
Right, you're absolutely right. In the summer of 1917, the United States enters World War I. The U.S. military was still segregated. The military was constructing a training facility called Camp Logan.
So when these 700 black soldiers show up in Houston, Jim Crow is alive and well. And you got to remember, it's a new thing. And these soldiers had fought in the Spanish-American War, had gone up San Juan Hill, had fought in the Philippines. They weren't used to being treated as second-class citizens.
It all came to a head that August when Houston police officers were accused of attacking and killing one of the soldiers. Black soldiers of Camp Logan then marched from what's now Memorial Park to the city of Houston.
This was a push against Jim Crow authority.
Mutiny and rioting ensued.
It was a strike against police brutality.
16 white people were killed, mostly civilians. 4 black soldiers died. The deadly encounter led to the soldiers' court-martial, the largest murder trial in U.S. history.
I saw the photograph of the trial, that blew my mind. Here are these 63 black soldiers surrounded by white soldiers with fixed bayonets on their rifles. And caption said the largest murder trial in American history. And I had never heard anything about this, nothing.
In the end, 19 soldiers were hanged, and all but 8 of 118 soldiers charged were convicted for their part in the Houston riot of 1917.
The police force of southern cities would send certain police officers to patrol black communities. Slave patrols in many parts of the South literally become police forces whose job it is to then police newly formed black communities.
Plantations ultimately turned to prisons, with slave labor giving way to prison labor all across Texas, including Sugar Land.
This building is actually 80 years old. It was originally a prison and part of the Texas prison system.
It was an extension of the Central State Prison Farm. The big brick building known as 2 Camp opened in 1939.
It was a prison population of color, primarily African American, some Hispanic.
The inmates worked the fields of the state-run farm. An inmate recalled that upon arriving at 2 Camp in 1960, he was immediately ushered out into the fields to pick cotton. At the end of a grueling day, workers would return to the dormitory, where life was often just as hard.
They lived in very close quarters, actually in very hot conditions and very cold conditions.
Its occupants are mostly children now, but for 30 years, this structure housed inmates.
Did you know the Freedom Tree in Missouri City is where slaves at the Palmer Plantation were notified they were free? They were told they could continue working the land, but their only form of payment would be a share of their crop. The Freedom Tree is located along Misty Hollow Drive, that's between Glen Lakes and Lake Olympia Boulevards. Walter Moses Burton was a farmer, sheriff, and politician who served 4 terms in the Texas State Senate. Burton was born into slavery in North Carolina and brought to Texas when he was 21. After emancipation, he bought land in Fort Bend County and was eventually elected the first black sheriff in the country.
Are you registered to vote?
No, I'm not. I have tried twice, and I was turned down both times. Lost my job.
You had Jim Crow laws, you had poll taxes, and slowly you see things that are going backwards.
So the first way you see a push against black political organizing is through the Klan. Thousands of people would sometimes show up to watch a crowd of people lynch, burn, and mutilate, in some cases, black bodies. The people who were lynched were usually people who stood up for themselves economically or politically. Self-styled, so-called militias were using violence to subdue black voters. By the 1890s, enough violent intimidation had happened that you have white Democrats returning to power in states across the former Confederacy. The fact that we're still struggling with attempts to disfranchise voters shows exactly why we have to look at segregation as this multi-pronged attack on equality.
Dr. Martin Luther King's second day of civil rights testing in Selma, Alabama started off smoothly enough. But when the would-be registrants and those who accompanied them arrived at the Dallas County Courthouse, it was a different story.
Segregation was labeled separate but equal, but was far from it. Religious leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Fred Shuttleworth, and Houston's Reverend Bill Lawson began to help in protest against it.
The movement spreads across the South. Students at Texas Southern University especially begin to boycott and then gain allies, in some cases from white students from nearby colleges.
13 of them, to be precise. On March 4th, 1960, they marched, but they went to the lunch counters at the wine gardens on Alameda, and they sat, and they sat. And so they initiated the civil rights movement in Houston, Texas.
The support and mentorship of Reverend Lawson and other folks was especially significant because in some cases, the older generation sometimes agreed more with the strategies of the NAACP, who were using the courts and using the law. Because it's important to remember that technically sit-ins are illegal.
They know that what they are doing could potentially put them in danger. They're thinking about the injustices that their parents have faced, that their relatives face. They're thinking about the injustice that they themselves are facing in a world that is supposed to be separate and equal, but is everything but equal. Well, historically, black colleges and universities, their history is related to the fact that our nation was not ready for people of African descent to study with white Americans.
Prairie View A&M is a direct result of Juneteenth. Those individuals who heard that message that day, they went forth with the zeal and the fervor to realize what an education could do for emancipated blacks. Most importantly, now you have individuals who could not read, who could not write, that came and got remedial lessons here and could go back out into their communities to be productive people.
I chose TSU because there was a sense of belonging that I felt when I walked on the campus. It felt like family, it felt like home, and it gave me a feeling of purpose and that I was destined to be here for a specific reason.
And we know that Prairie View produces productive people. And that's one of the mottos here at this school, and it's very much tied back to that same group, that first generation who came here, who studied, who thrived, and sought to make their communities better.
And as a little girl, to me, the building, Hannah Hall, was colossal. Little did I know that one day I would have the opportunity to teach at this school. This institution has been a beacon of light to people in the community.
When it came to primary education, the Gregory Institute became the high school for Houston's black children in the 1870s. At one point, it was the only high school for black students. In 1871, Harris County had the largest number of black students in school in Texas, with 734 males and 760 females. The Gregory School is now home to the African American Library. After years of fighting and debate, Betsy Ross Elementary became the first public school in Houston to integrate. The year, 1960. But even as the Houston School District began to eliminate segregation, there was pushback from white parents, as shown here in a 1970 New York Times article.
You know, it's really amazing how this area, this park, has blossomed and transformed in this community.
It is incredible when you think about the history of Emancipation Park. You know, there was a time when this was the only park that blacks in Houston could come to.
And today we've seen people of all colors here.
All colors, all races, all religions, enjoying the city, enjoying the park together.
Yeah, a park for all.
A park for all. What do you think your great-grandfather, who purchased this property to create Emancipation Park, would think of what is happening on this site today?
I'm sure he probably never thought about would this be continued 100 years later, 150 years later? But I think he would be extremely proud to know that the citizens of Houston, Texas have continued to celebrate the Juneteenth.
Emancipation Park remains a pillar in the Black community, just as it did when it opened in 1872. From playgrounds, basketball courts, a theater, and the arts, it celebrates a rich history while educating the next generation. But getting that education in schools has not been easy.
I think it's just a history that some people are still so uncomfortable talking about.
We always knew what Juneteenth was. The rest of the country did not. Juneteenth isn't taught in American history. Juneteenth isn't taught in our school, in our public school system.
I guess within the last 30 years that I've learned really a lot about Juneteenth. Attending segregated schools, we just didn't have a lot of information about slavery, and if it was presented, it was presented in such a watered-down way. We knew the significance of Galveston to Juneteenth, or the freeing of the slaves.
Juneteenth is so important, and it's funny, I didn't learn about it fully until I got to college, and at this HBCU that I learned about it.
As a former longtime educator, how important is that for students to be presented that information in their general education?
It's America's history. We hear the stories of immigrants coming to the United States. We hear about why they wanted to leave or why they want to be here. And everything that happens in the United States is United States history.
All Americans need to understand when and how slaves were freed in the state of Texas.
I know that in my own class, when I'm teaching in the summer, I make sure that we do a focus on Juneteenth and we celebrate the day so that students are aware of the significance of the day and also of the significance of TSU in continuing the message of Juneteenth.
It's a huge problem not teaching youth about the history. When you go back and you say, this didn't happen, then a young person will be like, oh, so what's their problem? That never happened. So then you create more of a division between cultures.
I think telling our story is very important. So if you only get one perspective all the time, you're just missing all those other shades of meaning, all those other perspectives. The catalyst for my mother writing her book, Island of Color, where Juneteenth started, is that she remembered and found a journal that her grandfather had kept. After he would say his prayers, he would write in this journal. He was writing about African American history going back to when he first came here in 1865. I think it's a treasure trove of information. Knowing one's legacy, I think, provides a sense of being grounded, a sense of belonging. It is actually foundational to our entire country because of its history of slavery.
Even though things are better, but there's so much more work to do.
With the George Floyd protests, probably more Americans came together of all races and groups than have come together in this country in a long time. Really, since the Civil Rights Movement, more Americans came together.
The 2020 murder of Houston native George Floyd and the conviction of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin led to global protests and reignited the conversation of police reform.
You saw white, you saw Asian, you saw Hispanic, along with black, screaming at the top of their voices that black lives do matter.
This bill is a bill that will speak to the hearts and minds of those who have been harmed by wrong kind of policing standards, and quickly, it will end racial profiling. It will provide training for the 18,000 police departments. It will ensure that there is a standard for excessive force, no more, a duty to intervene.
The House of Representatives passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act in June of 2020. But as of June 2021, it has not passed the Senate.
I guess that's the end of the video. Uh, there was a couple of things else that were there that were important, but to understand what happened in Texas is to understand what happened throughout the nation. Juneteenth, June 19th, uh, I say it was more recently celebrated uh, throughout the country than it was in earlier days. But the emancipation of our folks and the ending of formal slavery began the informal slavery system. Uh, After the Emancipation Proclamation, we had a period of what was called Reconstruction. Reconstruction lasted for a brief period of time in which local municipalities began to elect people of color. Even the U.S. Congress began to elect people like Branch Bruce to the Senate, Robert Smalls, and other individuals of African descent to Congress. And this happened for a period of time. And then what happened was when Abraham Lincoln, right after the Emancipation Proclamation, was assassinated, and then a vice president, the Southern Roots and Southern Sympathy, began to try to curtail Reconstruction and stop the advancement of Africans within the society. So the battle began, and then organizations like the White Citizens Council, uh, the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, began to violently uh, kill and destroy African Americans. White folks some can get very violent in some of those situations. You heard the fact that some of our black soldiers were attacked and hung in Texas, but that's happening in other parts of the country where black soldiers come back from fighting a war, like after World War One and World War II, were attacked and brutalized. Uh, we set up laws in order to maintain uh, our situation in which veterans are treated fairly, and that has helped. It helped tremendously. But then, at the same time, racism did not start, and some blacks were treated in a terrible, terrible kind of way. So I'm hoping that you celebrate Juneteenth. Uh, uh, there'll be all kinds of ceremonies throughout the country. Lift up this holiday, and maybe one day it'll become a national holiday. But we also have to begin to stop racism and discrimination that exists. Uh, just want to remind folks that we are still in business. I have returned to work. I'm down in Lebanon, and I brought back with me some wonderful items to add to my collection of drums and artifacts, and oils and African clothing. And we reach out to you to come in. We will really appreciate your support. Come down to Lebanon Valley Market, Farmers Market, located at 35 uh, uh, South 8th Street. Brief period of time, my daughter handled it, but I'm back. I'm back to work. Got a tremendous number of beautiful, colorful masks. Got a whole collection of drums that came in, and just bought 20 new pieces of African clothing. So stop by to see me. Come by and make a purchase. If you're into natural soaps, natural oils, come by and see me, and we will take care of you. Again, the history is everywhere. We had to fight all over the country to maintain equality. And just remember one thing I noted with the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests against George Floyd's murder at the hands of a wicked, corrupt police officer, that the movement flared up all over the world. Uh, Africans, whites, Asians, young people raised their fists, protesting inequality. And it's all about love. We got to understand. That old song said, "Give peace a chance." There's no reason for violence. There's no reason to attack others, but there's every reason in the world to learn how to love and respect people of all races. I love my African art. I love my African people. I also love my Asian, my white uh, people, my Indians. I love all people. Let's come together in unity and in love and raise up the banner of freedom, justice, and equality. And we want to thank again, we say this because we're really, really pleased to have the opportunity to have a broadcast that goes all over the world. I have relatives in Africa that regularly look at this broadcast all over the world. And that's what the internet can do for you. Facebook can do for you. YouTube can do for you. And we have that opportunity to present it. And thank you, Brother Chris Thomas and Sister Thomas and the entire Thomas family. Thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation. And we'll look forward to doing the same thing next week. And God bless you and heaven smile upon you. And to my brothers and sisters of all races, give peace a chance. And so long. Take care.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African and our African American programs are set up to educate you on what's going on in this world. We thank you for taking out the time. So listen, let us hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.